My name is Kris Clarkin. I am a creative director at Boys+Girls. In college, in my undergrad, I studied multimedia. What was good about that course was we got the opportunity to do loads of different things, from web design to video to radio, and it kind of gave you a good grounding in media without necessarily giving you any specific skills after that. But it kind of gave you it gave you a good run of all the different types of things you might be able to do when you go out into the world. My first job out of college was with Setanta Sports. I started for about a year and a half doing live editing. So that's just like watching matches, cutting down packages, quite basic editing functions, more kind of part of the production stream, as opposed to working on anything that was creatively interesting. But it was a really interesting job because it was very much like you were part of something bigger. Live TV is a really interesting thing to work on, great fun. And then from there, I sort of moved into promo producing, which I guess was a starting point for working in advertising without really realizing it, insofar as you were making ads for the channel, but you are doing absolutely everything. So of all the roles that you would have in advertising, they're all condensed into one person practically in promo producing in Setanta. So you're writing the scripts, you're finding the footage, you're editing it together, you're doing the graphics, you're directing something if it needs to be directed, you're potentially shooting it, you're putting it onto the servers to go out on air. All of those jobs is one kind of person or two people's jobs. So I did that for about 3.5 years, which was an amazing experience because we were the channel itself was on the rise at that time, and we were allowed, I think, to do a lot more than we probably, should have been allowed to do. Or in a bigger organization, a bigger company, bigger TV station, you wouldn't have had that ability to do that much work. So got to learn by doing, which was amazing. And after that, I took voluntary redundancy and went and did a master's in Kingston University in motion design, because I thought it was something that I was quite interested in when I was doing the promo producing. Specifically picked that course because it was a 12-month master's with top teachers and lecturers that were coming in from the industry every kind of couple of weeks. And they were people that were coming in teaching you about music sleeve design or music design. They were teaching typography. I think after that I realized that isn't, motion design is not what I want to do. Post side of things is not what I want to do. It's the ideas side. And that kind of brought me back to advertising and going into kind of trying to get myself in the door of a creative agency, because that's where all the idea generation is happening. That's where kind of the interesting parts of all of those ideas can come together in one place. You come up with the idea and then you go out and you talk to those experts. I didn't really understand how advertising worked, and I went and spoke to Ronan Nulty, who's now the ECD in Publicis, and Rory Hamilton, who was the creative director of Boys+Girls. I showed them my book or my reel, or some of my work. I didn't really have an advertising book because I didn't really know what they were talking about. But both of them kind of suggested that I become a writer. And I didn't really know there was a difference between a writer or an art director, but it was your writing is good, you should focus on that. They're both writers, so I think that might have influenced that decision. But at the same time, Ronan actually had there was an opportunity in Publicis to go in, so I kind of went in on a trial basis for 3 or 4 months just to see how that might work, and I ended up getting a full-time job off the back of that and stayed with them for 4 years. I was kind of constantly in touch with Rory, just about just shooting the breeze, kind of getting, because they were good at giving advice. And then an opportunity arose in Boys+Girls about 4 years later, and I moved from Publicis to Boys+Girls as a kind of senior copywriter. And within that time frame, I suppose I was in Boys+Girls maybe 4 years, and then I got kind of promoted into the creative director position. So the only two people I spoke to in advertising were the two people who eventually have employed me. So yeah, it was, I think, in that way, quite lucky. A creative director is somebody who is in charge of the vision of the creative for the brand that they're working on. They will set the creative bar, and they will ensure that whatever the creative is that's coming out of the agency hits that mark. Depending on the day, depending on the client, depending on what you're working on, your role will change. But ultimately, it's always in service of ensuring that the creative is unique, is interesting, is different, hits a certain standard, and is having an effect for the client. The creative process is different depending on the brief, but I guess if you take it for the basic level of we've been given a brief, or we've agreed upon a brief, because I think as a creative director, you should work quite closely with the other departments in the agency before the brief is kind of finalized. And then when the brief comes into the creative department, the first thing we're doing is having a look at what's the attention idea, what's the proposition, what is a one line within that brief that is going to grab people's attention and is a thing that we're going to expand upon and make interesting. So a good brief should have a good angle on what the brand's or services problem is. So you're looking for that problem, you're looking for what's the unique insight that they've given you that will give you something to build upon and to find a creative hook for. And then your job is really to go away and just get as many ideas out as possible. And I think that's a really important part of that initial creative phase, is just constantly writing things down, writing ideas down, talking to each other, shooting the breeze, never shooting an idea down too early, and having the confidence to say the crap idea, because there might be a kernel of something in there that somebody else picks up on and builds on. And I think the sociability aspect of being a creative is really important. With like the energy in a room, talking to people, trying to come up with ideas, sitting down with a whiteboard or a sketch pad or a pen and paper and just thinking about things is probably the most important thing. There are multiple projects happening at the same time, and they're all in different phases. So I think that's kind of an important factor. So like you could be in production on something, so there could be a shoot to attend. You could be in post-production on something, so there could be an edit to attend, graphics, like a sound recording. You could be in pre-production on something, so there are meetings with production companies or with your production department. You could be at the infancy of a job, so you're kind of working with the strategy department on kind of refining a brief. Or you could be kind of in development on the creative development of something, so you're working with the teams that are kind of tasked with that job to come up with ideas or to help them find the nuggets within their ideas and to bring them on to the next level and kind of like give them the opportunity to sort of go, no, do you know what, that's the interesting part, kill the rest of it, like let's focus on this direction. It could be all of those things in one day, or it could be one of them. It totally depends, which is great, because it gives you a lot of variety, but there isn't necessarily a typical day. I hate creative freedom on a job. I think when you work well as a creative in an advertising agency, you've got a particular focus or goal. You know, you have a specific problem that you're trying to solve or a particular thing you're trying to achieve, and you're trying to find an interesting, exciting, unique way to get there. And when neither of those two things are defined, it's just incredibly vague. And I think that's kind of the difference between like art and commerce. Like that's where you're asking someone to create an art piece in that instance, because it's more, how do you feel about something, as opposed to what are you trying to achieve with this thing. I think as a creative, you always feel out of your depth. You need to be doing something new to feel like you're challenging yourself or moving yourself forward. And if you aren't doing something new and you're very comfortable in your job, then most likely you're not doing a very good job, because it's going to be what you're doing is going to be pretty familiar. If you're familiar with what's happening, then you can be pretty sure the output is going to be pretty familiar. A company that comes to you with a pitch, when they're going on for pitch, they usually have quite a substantial problem. It's really interesting to kind of go, okay, this is a brand or a service or an industry or an area that we've never worked in before. So it's exciting to go back researching that and looking at that, trying to find what's been done in this space before, what are the angles on it, and then come up with a creative solution for that when you've never done it before necessarily. Yeah, I think the things I don't like about the pitch process are less attached to the creative side of it and more attached to the business side of it. And I think I actually think it needs to be overhauled quite substantially in Ireland as to how we are pitching jobs. The thing that I've listened to, and I've started listening to quite a bit recently, is a show called The Good One. Good One is a comedy podcast by Vulture magazine in the States. Like each time the presenter has one comedian on, and they take one joke from a set, like so, max kind of 5-minute joke, and they play that joke at the beginning of the set, and then they do a deep dive on that joke and how that joke was created. And I've been fascinated by that idea, because like the comedians are writers and performers roll into one, And the writing process, while different, kind of does mirror what we do. And I find it very interesting to hear, because the presenter really gets into the nitty gritty of where did that idea come from. And usually it comes from your life, which is, for the most part, when you come up with an ad, it may not be a direct scene from your life, but you are bringing an element of your personality or an element of an experience from your life into that work. So the starting points are similar. And then I find it really interesting when they talk about the craft attached to how that idea turned into a story, how that story turned into a joke, how that joke was honed and changed over time to become the piece that they ended up on their special. My proudest moments, I think, actually sort of depends on the space you are in your career. I've been lucky to have won 2 of the biggest awards, like international awards in advertising. So I won a D&AD Yellow Pencil for writing for a piece we did for Swim Ireland, which I was really proud of, because that is a piece that was about trying to remind parents to keep an eye on their children in the water, especially around the time when it was summertime. There was a lot of kids getting into trouble in the water in Ireland in the last year. And then the second one was we won a gold Cannes Lion for a project we worked on for 3 Ireland, which was called The Connected Island, which I'd say that's probably the proudest I've been of a piece of work we've done, because it was a huge undertaking. So the idea behind that was there was all the islands across Ireland, on the west coast of Ireland, are kind of slowly dying. Most of them have been abandoned and their populations are dwindling. And the reality is the majority of jobs, 90% of jobs or more now, require connectivity for those jobs to work. And the islands are being just ignored, forgotten about. They're not part of government national broadband plans, anything like that. And this island, Donegal, called Arranmore, we read a particular story where there was a business in London. The person who owned the business was a tech company and was from Arranmore, wanted to bring their business back to Arranmore, set up there. Amazing business, Irish language, kind of educational apps and things that they're building. Couldn't, because they didn't have connectivity. And that was a little kernel. And we worked with 3 over an 18-month period to try and get the infrastructure. So it wasn't just an ad campaign where we went up with cameras and shot a few people. It was literally getting the tech teams, the networks teams, the business teams, all up from where they are up to Arranmore, and trying to figure out how can we bring connectivity to this island so this island can thrive. And they managed to do that, and we were so lucky in a lot of ways that they did that before lockdown, and they had all this connectivity, and the population for the first time in 150 years has actually spiked on the island because they have this connectivity and they have all of this ability now, and it means that they have longevity on that island because of connectivity. But that's because of an article we read in the paper and a project that was followed through by the client, but it had real world benefit. So it's difficult not to be proud of that piece of work. The advice I give my 18-year-old self, I think would probably be to do more. As in, when I say do, I mean make more. Especially in early stages of my life or career, I sat back a lot and talked about things I'd like to do, or wrote down ideas that I would like to make but never made them. And I think there's nothing like the energy of actually, or there's nothing like the experience of just making the thing. And I think sometimes I didn't make it for stupid reasons. I felt oh well, if I made it, it would be crap, and if it was crap, I'd be judged, and if I was judged, then I'd be wouldn't get another job or something like that, which is idiotic. You just need to keep on making things, because the more you do it, the better you get at it. And I think I could have been better at that earlier, which would have I think I would have been quicker in my career had I done that.